So we decided on the Great Commission because these were some of the last words of Jesus to his apostles before he ascended into heaven. And what he was doing was he was calling these men to be like him and into their ministry as witnesses. And we find it in Matthew 28:18 through 20, and I'll read it again to remind everybody. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age." So the way we broke this up, Jim Bob gave an introduction last week, kind of over the entire thing, talked about what our mission was, focused on the fact that God is with us. And then we're going to spend the next 4 weeks hitting each verb from the Great Commission. So this week is go, and then we'll go from there. It was kind of daunting thinking about it at first, making a sermon based around one word. But I got the interesting word, go, and it's going to be an interesting sermon. So we'll take some time as we go through this to really dissect this word go. But before we get started, let's watch a video.
Samuel, you want to shoot something?
No, Spider-Man.
Oh, Spider-Man. I'm sorry. Hey Zeke, can we use that cup that you're drinking up? Are you done with it?
Yeah, I'm done.
Could you set it up on the couch right here?
Where? Over here?
Yeah, just right there in the middle.
In the middle?
Yeah, close enough so Spider-Man here can shoot it with this shotgun. You ready to do this, Samuel? All right. Settle down there, Spider-Man. Got to keep your cool. Now you got to put your eyes on the prize.
Okay.
Okay, now load your gun. Now shoot. Samuel, what did you do? Let's see.
Okay.
Let's see what you did.
What on
Whoa. Samuel, Spider-Man, you demolished
I
that.
just broke it.
So I don't know if you could tell at the very beginning, he refused to be called Samuel. He wanted to be called by his official name, Spider-Man. And I'm sure you can tell that he didn't really shoot that cup with his plastic gun. There were other forces involved that were beyond his control, but he was quick to take the credit for it. Nobody else did it. Samuel broke it. Right? And I think whenever it comes to the Great Commission, we're quick to do the same thing with this verb go. It becomes our responsibility. It becomes something that we do, and we kind of miss the point. So I've heard a lot of sermons on the Great Commission, specifically go, and they always are right before a great missions trip. Everybody's getting fired up by the Great Commission because we're going to the nations. And I think that's a great idea, and Scripture plays that out. We have many scriptures in the Bible about going and being witnesses. And one of those is Acts 1:8. "And when the Holy Spirit comes on you, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, all over Judea and Samaria, even to the ends of the world." So Jesus is telling his apostles that they're going to be going. And it's equivalent to him saying you're going to go to your city, you're going to go to your state, you're going to go to your country, and then you're going to go even to the ends of the world. And I think that's a great concept. It's something that we're called to do as Christians. We're to go and spread the good news. But the Great Commission doesn't mean exactly the same thing. This word go in the Great Commission is slightly different. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on that. Me personally, I love word studies in the Bible. And preaching on one word, I think, could be difficult, but when you start really digging in, things are not always as simple as they appear. Don't know if you knew this, but the Bible wasn't written in English. It was written a long time ago. And the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, the New Testament was written in Greek, and the English translations that we have today were translated from that original text. And the Greek language that the New Testament was written in is a very rich language. And when it comes down to translating, sometimes the English language doesn't have the depth to portray that Greek word in one English word. An example would be the word love. the Greek language has many, many words for love that lie along different levels. From a brotherly love like you would love a friend, to the love that you show to God as the sovereign being of the universe. But here in America, I love my wife, but I also really love a filet of fish sandwich from McDonald's. So you get the idea? Sometimes we have to take a Greek word and translate it into an entire English phrase just so that we can see what the meaning of that Greek word originally was. So, I get to use a couple of big words because I'm in college, and if we look at this Greek verb, go, in the original text, it's an aorist passive participle. And that doesn't mean anything to me, so I did some reading to find out what that actually meant. So when we read this passage, we read it as a command from Jesus. Go make disciples of all nations, right? But this verb is passive, so it means that we're not the one doing the action. We are made to do that action. So somebody else is doing the action. So it should be deeper than just go. It should be made to go, make disciples of all the nations. But that doesn't really make sense. It's not a correct sentence. And it's because that Greek word is a participle. So it's a verb that describes, in the Greek, another thing. And that happens to be us, the audience that Jesus is talking to. So it's not just go make disciples of all nations. It's you, a people made to go, make disciples of all nations. So it's like a name that he's giving this audience. And then we come down to the final part, aorist or aorist, and that describes the tense like past, present, future. But the truth of the matter is Jesus is talking to a very diverse audience. They met him on the road, and at the beginning of the Great Commission it says that immediately some bowed down in worship. They knew exactly who he was, they were committed to this work, and they bowed down and worshiped immediately. But it also says among that same group there were some doubters. So instead of just go make disciples of all nations, God was speaking to the ones, or Jesus was speaking to the ones who had already made a decision to follow him by saying, you, a people having been made to go, make disciples of all nations. But the aorist also encompasses those who hadn't made that decision yet. So to those people, he was saying, you, a people who will be made to go, make disciples of all nations. So he's speaking to this diverse group of people about being made to go. But then we go a level deeper. Kind of like Inception, things get a little bit more interesting. Jesus, more than likely, didn't speak Greek. So he spoke Hebrew, and then later on, the writer of the New Testament wrote it in Greek because it was a common language. So more than likely, the word that Jesus used here is the Hebrew word halak. And I think they use that. I'm not a professional Hebrew language person, but I know they do that a lot. So I think it's halak. And it specifically means to go in a certain direction or down a certain path. And even more interesting, at the time, it was a Hebrew idiom. So it was a word used to mean something else. And the idiom was a way of living, walking down a path designed by God. So what Jesus was saying here was not just go make disciples of all nations. Brings us to our first blank. He was saying, you, a people having been made to walk along God's path, make disciples of all nations. So this has become more meaningful, right, than our just single English word, go. Jesus is calling these people to a new way of life, a new path to God, the only real path that God had created and had set forth for us to follow. The commands that follow this verb go, the disciple, baptize, and teach, they're supposed to take place on our journey. as we walk down that path, regardless of our physical location. So Jesus is calling us to a life, not a summer trip to a third world country. That might be part of your journey, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. And I think it's played out here in the ministry of City Point. There are many in our group who have traveled from far away to make home here, to be part of this work. And I think it would be safe to say that most of those people were forced by God to make this move. They had their arm twisted to leave what was familiar so that they could come here and be part of the work that God had set up. But then there are others of us who have lived in Fayetteville all our life. We're not making this journey to be part of God's work. We're already here. We're already part of this community. But the journeys of both groups are similar in that we have a desire to love and serve this city of Fayetteville and to multiply God's kingdom here in this place. So now, we've got this new definition of go, right? Having been made to walk along God's path. And we're going to look at what happens when we go. I think a good example of this idea would be the journey of the Exodus of the Israelites. If you're not familiar with the story, we have this group of people who were enslaved in the nation of Egypt. And God chooses them out of every nation to be His people. He causes them to leave Egypt, and then He brings them to a land that He gives them. So there's a physical journey that happens. They're leaving one place and going to another. But I think on a deeper level with the Israelites was this spiritual journey. They were a people enslaved in Egypt, living that hopeless life. And God showed them a new way, a new path to walk down, a path that led to God as God's people. So let's look at it. As we go, God sets us apart. The Israelites were called to a higher standard. So before, many of the Israelites, in fact probably most, lived like any other nation. Right? Even Abraham married his half-sister. It was something that was common. It was just the way life was. But it's no longer the way God wanted them to live. God speaks through Moses in the book of Leviticus 18:3-5, and says, don't live like the people of Egypt, where you used to live. And don't live like the people of Canaan, where I'm bringing you. Don't do what they do. Obey my laws and live by my decrees. I am your God. Keep my decrees and laws. The person who obeys them lives by them. I am God. So this group of people bore the name of Yahweh, God. He chose them to be His people, and because of that, God could no longer let them live the way they wanted to live. If they lived the way they wanted to, then other nations might see the Israelites and get the wrong impression of the God, Yahweh. So He had to call them to a higher level. Now this isn't legalism, because the laws that they were obeying didn't make the Israelites better than any other nation. What made the Israelites great is that they were chosen by God out of all the nations. And the trade-off for being chosen by God was this new way of living life. This new path that God had placed them on. So we too are chosen by God, right? We're new people. We're grafted in as Christians. And we have freedom from this list of the Israelites, this do's and don'ts. But that being said, this journey, this life journey that we're on, is difficult enough without complicating things by the way that we act. The writer of Hebrews puts it this way in Hebrews 12:1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. So we have this picture of our walk being like a race. So if you're in a hole somewhere, you might not know this, but the Olympics are on right now. Okay? They've been on for the last couple weeks. Today's the last day. And over this past week have been the track and field finals. So we've been seeing these athletes at the peak of their career come out and run a race. And they spend all of their time, the 4 years leading up to the Olympics, living and eating a certain way so that they shed all of the extra weight. They're pretty much as lean as you can be and still be alive. Because these runners don't want to carry anything extra. They don't want to be slowed down by anything that's unnecessary. So if you were to walk up to these runners during the final and say, you're going to run the final, but could you carry this backpack full of potatoes? They would look at you like you're crazy. That's not a race, right? That's just some ridiculous extra weight to carry to the finish line. But we see here, sometimes we act that way. As a Christian, we play this game of how much weight can I carry and still make it to the finish line? How much extra things and sins can I fill my life up with and still slide in right at the end? But that's not how a race works. It's not just about the beginning and the end, but it's the performance in the middle that really defines the race. I don't know how often the commentators would speak of a person in the race as being a great finisher. That person is a great finisher. They were rarely ever in first place. Because being a great finisher only covers part of the race. The guys who are in the top, they have spent their time training and shedding the extra so that they can run the full race. So that's what we need to do when we look at our life. And I think it's what some of us are doing here at City Point right now. If you're just here for the first time, you didn't know this, but we just got finished with a series on prayer and fasting. And we encouraged everyone for the 40 days before our grand opening to fast from something and pray about something. And it could be anything, it wasn't necessarily food, but just fast from something. As Christians, we're called to fast. And what that's doing is it's getting rid of the fat. It's not just sin. I mean, everybody struggles with sin, and that's something we deal with every day. But as Christians, and I think especially as Western Christians, we fill our lives up with these things that slow us down on this journey that God has made us to walk on. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10:23, we are allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for us to do. We are allowed to do anything, but not all things help us grow stronger as Christians. If you've been watching the Olympics, you know that the men's and women's world record for the 4x100 meter relay were both broken this year. The Jamaican team broke the men's world record, and the American team broke the women's world record. And I think they were running faster than I go on a bicycle. And realistically, these men and women, they have the right, as living in a country of freedom, to eat whatever they want to eat. Right? That's their right. If they want to eat McDonald's every day, enjoy those filet of fish, they have every right to do that. But they choose not to because they have a race to run. And they also have the freedom to act in any way they want. Right? They don't have to train. But they choose to train because they have a race to run. So that's what we're called to do as Christians. We're to step back and look at our lives and think, what is extra? What is keeping me from this path towards God? What is separating me from the Father? And then we begin to trim those things out of our life so that we can live with the prize. And secondly, as we go, God propels us forward. So this is really interesting. I know the Israelites are a great analogy. I've been reading a lot at the beginning of the Bible just recently, and some really amazing stories. Amazing stories. One of the things is that the Israelites were led through the wilderness by a thick cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night led them through the wilderness. They had no idea where they were going. They had no idea where the end was, but they were led through the wilderness by this miracle of a cloud, thick cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. And if that cloud were to stop, then the Israelites would set up camp right there. Because they knew they couldn't go any farther. The cloud had stopped. But as soon as that cloud began to move, they gathered their things up and started following, because if they stayed, they would have no way of knowing where they were supposed to go. And it wasn't just direction. God also blessed the Israelites. They left Egypt with somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 million people. And they spent over 40 years in the wilderness traveling from Egypt to Canaan. And God sustained them through the entire journey. They get to this land of Canaan, and God clears a way for them so that they can possess the land. He showed himself to the Israelites because they were his people. Also, he moved them along. I mentioned whenever the cloud moved, the people of Israel would move, but even more than that, the circumstances surrounding their time in Egypt caused the Egyptians to kick them out. I'm not going to go into the full story because it's a long story and it's a sermon series in and of itself. But the Israelites were kicked out of Egypt by the Egyptians. They couldn't stay if they wanted. And when they would come to a river, God would part that river so that they could walk across. But as soon as they were across, God closed that river. They weren't going back. And then anytime they would start complaining in the wilderness about, oh, this is terrible. We wish we were back in Egypt where life was good. God would always do something, whether it was a plague or causing water to come out of a rock. He would do something to push them forward so that they were always moving along the path to the promised land. So it's the same with us. God has made us to walk this path. Right? It's not us who is going. God is causing us to go. He set us on this journey. He's also already paved the way. Hebrews 12, 2 through 3 says, we just read verse 1, this is 2 through 3. Keep your eyes on Jesus, who both began and finished this race we're in. Study how he did it, because he never lost sight of where he was headed. That exhilarating finish in and with God. He could put up with anything along the way. Cross, shame, whatever. And now he's there, in the place of honor, right alongside God. When you find yourself flagging in your faith, go over that story again, item by item. That long litany of hostility he plowed through, that will shoot adrenaline into your souls. We're not here on our own. This journey that we're traveling through together, this path to God that we're walking on as a group, it's not because of something that we've accomplished or any action that we've taken. We're here because God has made us to walk this path. He's brought us together and given us this city. And He's given us this city, and He's given this city to us. No, sorry. He's given us this city, and He's given us to this city. And fortunately for you and me, He's leading the way. This responsibility doesn't rest on my shoulders or Jim Bob's shoulders or Mark's shoulders, even though he's got broad shoulders. God has made us to walk this journey, and He's paving the way before us. He sees the great things that will happen here in Fayetteville. He knows the great things that He has in store. So He's called us to this path. Love, serve, multiply. And He's given this city, Fayetteville. So all we have to say is, here we go. Let's pray.